Great.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And all right, I'll kick us off here. Thank you all very much for being here and welcome. We appreciate you being here today to talk about how to manage your appropriation from the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, or ENRTF. I am Noah Fribley, Project Analyst and Communications Specialist with the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, or LCCMR. And I'd like to ask my co-host, Mike Campana, to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Mike Campana with the LCCMR. Glad to see you all here.
Okay, I'd like to make a couple comments to start. First, so you're aware, this is being recorded and will be made available to you after the presentation. I'll send an email out with this. Secondly, we're going to ask that you hold questions until the end. Please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, though, and we'll address them together through the Q&A portion.
Wow.
Lastly, we just want to take a minute and thank you for your hard work and passion you put into these projects. You all, both individually and as a group, represent great dedication to Minnesota's environment and natural resources. And from our end, it is a true pleasure to see your work in action. So to start, the purpose of this orientation is to make sure all the project managers who received their ENRTF funds this July are on the same page about processes and expectations as you work toward your individual project milestones and goals. We'll start by talking about the basics of LCCMR and ENRTF requirements. Then we'll explain the role of the LCCMR and LCCMR staff from here on out. Then my colleague, Mike Campana, will walk through what to expect regarding LCCMR reporting and updates, when and how to file an amendment to your work plan, and some tips and tricks for finding all the information in the future we're about to throw at you today. And again, lastly, we'll open it up to questions. Don't be bashful. We are here to help. And we won't be able to cover every requirement or process in detail, but we hope this orientation will provide you with the knowledge and tools to approach most expectations and situations. And I also want to acknowledge that some of you have received funding through the ENRTF before, or may have current active projects. So some of this information will not be new. We do hope you learned something you hadn't known, though, or are reminded of something you had forgotten. So before we dive in, we'd like to put some faces to names that you may be seeing over the life of your funding. You've met my colleague, Mike Campana, Senior Project Analyst here. Diana Griffith is our wonderful commission assistant. Our team is led by our director, Becca Nash, and Michael Varian, who will introduce himself in a little bit, is another one of our esteemed project analysts. And also want to mention, we are currently in the process of hiring 2 new staff, which we are very excited about, and who will be primarily focused on grant monitoring. So there will be 2 new faces on our team that some of you will likely be working with in the future. So before we talk specifics about requirements and policies related to your funding, I want to briefly touch on where those requirements and policies come from. And so the policies and requirements you may have already familiarized yourself with already during the proposal and work plan finalization process, and which will continue to influence how your funding can be used, are derived directly or indirectly from state law. And the purpose and scope of your specific projects are also written into state law when the legislature passed their ENRTF appropriations bill this last spring. So it's important that you're adhering to and aware of our policies and requirements, and that your project faithfully stays within the bounds of your specific project language. And know that if we're sticklers about doing things a certain way, if issues arise, it's for good reason. There are processes to amend your legally binding project language if absolutely necessary, although we really try to avoid doing that. And we'll touch on that later in the presentation. So we won't have time today to go through every requirement and policy in detail. We do want to familiarize you with the broad requirements and policy categories so that as your project progresses, you're ensuring that you're adhering to these policies. And we'll spend most of our time today talking about the reporting requirement, because that is one that is directly relevant to every project in a substantial way. I'll also touch on acknowledgement requirements as well. So all these requirements that, whether they apply to your project or not, are thoroughly detailed on our website. And if you have any questions about any of these today, please drop a question in the chat. And again, if you're unsure about whether certain requirements apply to your project or not, please let us know. We're happy to answer questions about that. So along those lines, I'd like to touch on one requirement that I deal with a lot as the communications lead for the LCCMR, and that's the acknowledgement policy. This is a policy that impacts every project. It's easy to adhere to, and as a reminder, a legal stipulation of your funding. So the ENRTF, as you probably know, is the result of a constitutional amendment that dedicates a portion of state lottery funds to environment and natural resource projects like your own. Funding from the ENRTF is therefore public dollars, and we take the accountability that comes with public dollars very seriously. We want to let Minnesotans know where these funds are going. And we do our best from our offices, but there are opportunities that you and only you have to ensure that Minnesotans know how the ENRTF benefits the state's environment. I won't go through every aspect of the requirement, but the gist of it is you are required to acknowledge the ENRTF and the LCCMR and any external facing communications that relate to your funded project. And external facing is important there. So this includes interviews, brochures, websites, press releases, social media, and more, and anything that relates to your funded project. Examples of how to do this with sample language can be found on our website, and I'll actually touch on this a little bit on the next slide as well, along with a full description of the requirements. Acknowledgement also helps us share your work with our audiences as well through social media, our weekly update, and more. We want to show off your research or restoration or construction project, and proper acknowledgement makes that a whole lot easier on our end. And to that end, we also ask that you share this requirement with your communications staff, project partners, and others involved with your project, so they're aware of the requirements and can act accordingly. So this is the kind of required language that we ask that you use. It's fairly straightforward. Funding, if it's verbal communication, say an interview or a podcast, something like that, we ask that you somehow work in that funding is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Or if it's written, we ask that you use funding for this project was provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, LCCMR. We understand those are long names. Sorry about that, not much we can do. So I wanted to briefly give you a couple examples of ways this can look in practice and we think are well done. The top left here is a tweet from Voyager's Wolf Project, a project we've funded over the years, and they end their tweet threads with this simple language. It's modified. It's not exactly the correct, not exactly the full required language, but that's okay for social media. We understand that people have different stylistic choices, and please just work it in the best way you can. Bottom left is from the MITPIC, or Minnesota Invasive Terrestrial Plant and Pest Center. Their website, they also do a great job acknowledging our work on both their website and press releases. And this little blurb at the bottom here, that this work is supported by the ENRTF as recommended by the LCCMR, is found at all the bottoms of their external facing communications. And lastly, I wanted to show you what it looks like in kind of a physical version as well. We do have signs you can buy from the DNR that have our language and our logo, but some folks choose to work it in to existing signage. So this is from a Dakota County Park sign for a project we funded about bison reintroduction. And it's a little hard to see in the corner here, but they have worked in our logo as well as the required language. And that's great. We love it. And you don't need to use our official sign as long as the acknowledgement is there. And the logo as well as the sign are available on our website. You can download several different versions of our logo, so you can find one that fits your style. Okay. So I will pivot next to discuss what you can expect from the LCCMR and LCCMR staff going forward and what we expect from you. We'll likely be working together for the next couple of years at least, and we have found it helpful to make sure everyone is on the same page from the outset. So the role of the LCCMR from here on out is mainly administrative and monitoring. We're mandated to be good stewards of ENRTF funds and to ensure that public dollars from the fund are spent in accordance with both our requirements and the stated purpose of your project. And we accomplish that through our structured reporting system, which Mike will touch on next. So the purpose of the reporting system is to monitor project progress and to facilitate any necessary changes through amendments and or extending the availability of funds in rare circumstances. So yeah, Mike will talk about that next. And I also want to note that when I or we say the LCCMR does this or that, we often mean LCCMR staff mandated by the commission. Only certain issues rise to the level of action by the commission itself, and we will certainly let you know if that's the situation. Otherwise, we are acting in their stead. Okay, so we also work in close coordination with the DNR grants unit, who are involved with ENRTF appropriations for non-state entities. I'm sure many of you have already, or I'm sure you all who are involved with the DNR have already begun that process. These non-state entities, including nonprofits, for-profits, and LGUs, local units of government, enter into a grant agreement with the DNR, which then allows the DNR to process reimbursement requests and make sure entities are following state processes for contracts, bidding, wage law, etc. The DNR hosts their own training, but the important takeaway here is that the DNR will not process reimbursement requests if you are not up to date with reporting to the LCCMR. So that is a very good incentive to keep those updates timely. And we highly encourage you to attend that DNR training. So in order to streamline communications back and forth between you and the LCCMR, each project has been assigned what we call an LCCMR staff lead. Your staff lead is the person responsible for helping you successfully complete the project while following the requirements of this unique funding source. Your staff lead is also the go-to contact for anything you might need. We ask that you reach out to your staff lead first about any questions or concerns. It is possible that your staff lead may change for a few different reasons, but your current staff lead will always be listed in the same spot on tab 10 in our online system. And at the end of the presentation, I'll kind of bring up a live version of the online system and show you where that is. The LCCMR does allow project managers to delegate or share access to the online system with additional individuals if necessary. Just because of how the online system works, only one person at a time should be making changes. It's not like a Google Doc where multiple people can be in there editing at the same time, one person at a time. And we also highly discourage sharing your login. So don't just give someone else your password and username to get in there and make changes. We ask that you share access through the formal way instead. One note there, project managers do retain final responsibility for reviewing and approving any submissions. So even if you've shared access, kind of the buck stops with the person with the designated project manager. So that's something to keep in mind and to be aware of going forward. So kind of to summarize a little bit, the most basic thing we expect from you is that you use your ENRTF funds to complete your project in a way that's consistent with your work plan. Hopefully the only challenges in doing so are the vagaries of the universe, like, for example, a global pandemic. Don't think we could have seen that coming. But we also expect that you're aware of and adhering to all our requirements that apply to your project, which is part of why we're having this orientation. And lastly, we operate under the assumption that as the officially designated project manager, you are monitoring project work, maintaining proper records and documentation, and coordinating your team according to the needs of the project. So a couple last things before I pass it over to Mike. We've worked with a lot of projects over the years and a lot of project managers. And from our end, there are two things we ask of you that we found that to make this process go smoothly. The first is to be proactive about issues or concerns. We're not here to get you in trouble or make things difficult for you and your project. Quite the opposite, in fact. We want to see you succeed, and we will work hard to help you do so. If issues arise during your project that you think might need our attention, don't be bashful about bringing it to us. We will be happy to work with you to help you understand options. And along those lines, the more time we have to deal with issues, the better for everyone involved. So please stay in contact with your staff lead. Surprises and a lack of communication are some of the biggest issues for us, and this is where things can run into trouble. This goes hand in hand with the first point here, that regular communication about any issues goes a really long way in making sure things go smoothly. Okay, I will pass it over to Mike now to talk through reporting updates and so much more fun stuff.
All right, great. Thank you, Noah. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So most, if not all of you, now have an approved work plan. When you go to the LCCMR proposal and grant management system, which you've probably picked up that we generally refer to as the online system, you will now access your project under the My Active Projects list. So it's moved from the My Proposal list to the My Active Projects list. And going forward, you will most often interact with us on LCCMR staff in two situations: during your regular reporting and when something changes and you need to amend your approved work plan. As a side note, these interactions with staff will generally occur through the online system, emails, phone calls, and virtual meetings. There's a lot of different ways we will be communicating with you. I'm going to first talk a little more about reporting. So, as Noah mentioned, regular reporting on your project is required by law. These regular reports are referred to as status updates, and you submit status updates using the online system. If you've looked at your work plan recently, you will see that there is now a reporting page. That page contains instructions on how to complete status updates as well as your reporting schedule. It will remind you of many of the things that I'm going to talk about here. So to begin with, status updates are required every 6 months. Most of you will be reporting in April and October, with your first status update due April 1st of next year. Next, the system will allow you to begin working on your update 6 weeks in advance of the due date. At that point, the reporting status of your work plan will change to update due. To help you remind you that a status update is due, the system will send you reminders automatically 1 week before the update is due. These reminders will be sent to the email account you have registered with us. So please check your spam filters and make sure those emails are on your safe list, because that is a primary way that you get updates about what you need to do. So now let's talk a little bit about what we are looking for in an update. On the status update page in the online system, the system will prompt you to provide an update on each activity in your work plan, your dissemination efforts, and an overall update. Specifically, your update should include a description of work conducted since your last update, including dissemination efforts. For example, if you're doing a shoreline restoration project, you should discuss things like specific permits applied for and obtained, contracts put out for bid and awarded, and shoreline miles restored. You should explicitly address progress or problems towards meeting milestones and outcomes since your last update and since the project began. Remember that your work plan includes specific milestones under each activity, as well as a statement of outcomes expected from the project under the work plan narrative. For example, if you had a milestone under one of your activities to engage 300 students in outdoor programs, tell us the number of students engaged since the last update and overall since the project began. So write something like, we engaged 50 students in the last 6 months, resulting in cumulative engagement of 200 students toward our 300 student goal. That would be a great update for us. You should also report on any findings, whether preliminary or final, of the project. As you begin to finish analyses of any data you have collected, tell us what you are seeing. This will most often apply to research projects. That covers most of what we were looking for in the written portion of your status update. In addition, all of you need to report your expenses under each line item in your budget. This is cumulative reporting of spending for each line item since the project began. And finally, if your project includes land acquisition or restoration, you will need to update the status of work by parcel. So now I'm going to show you a screenshot that shows you where you can find the status update page in your work plan. As I mentioned before, there are instructions at the top of the page. You will also be able to see your reporting schedule and when your next update will be due on this page. Within 6 weeks of the update due date, the fields that you need to fill out will appear as well. So you don't see that on this screenshot, but when you do get to that point, you will see it in your work plan. Please note that you do not update your expenses and parcel status on this page I'm showing you right now. Expenses are updated on the summary page under the budget tab, and parcel status is updated on the parcel list under the acquisitions and restorations tab. However, there are blue boxes on this page that provide you shortcuts to get those other areas of the work plan that need to be updated. And the system won't let you submit unless you have completed all the needed information. So you don't have to worry about forgetting to do it because the system won't let you submit unless you've actually completed that information. There's one final thing I want to mention regarding the content of your regular status updates, and that's attachments. In addition to the basic content, we encourage you to show us what you've accomplished rather than just tell us. You can use the attachments page to provide us with photos, flyers, media stories, publications and reports, designs and drawings, and other materials that show us what you have been doing and accomplished. If you do use attachments as part of your update, we do ask that you please reference them when describing the work you've accomplished on the status update page. So, you've completed your status update and submitted to us. What happens next? LCCMR staff will review your update with a focus on progress towards meeting project milestones and outcomes, consistency of spending with the work described, consistency of work with appropriation language and the approved work plan, and findings and results. Staff review usually occurs within 1 week of submittal, but may be longer during busy times or if multiple revisions are needed. Please note that revisions may be requested. If staff see that you are missing some of the content that I described earlier, we will send the status update back to you for revisions. If your update is sent back for revisions, the online system will send you an email notifying you of that. Once again, make sure these emails are not going to a junk folder. Staff will leave you notes on the revisions needed on the comments and revisions page found in the work plan, similar to the comments we may have left you during your work plan development. If you receive a request for revisions, please note the due date for response. Usually we give you about a week to complete revisions. Once the status update looks good, staff will approve the update and you will receive an automatic email notice of that approval from the online system. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the common issues that staff see that lead to revision requests. The first common issue we see is that reporting is limited to a statement that there is nothing to report or no progress has been made. We understand that's completely legitimate, but rather than just a sentence stating no progress was completed under an activity, tell us when you expect work to begin, and if you are behind, what the issues are and what the complications are that are preventing it from any work being done. The next common issue is lack of detail. We do want brief updates. We actually limit you to 200 words, but we don't want too brief. Think brief but specific rather than brief and vague. Aim for at least 100 words for each section of the update. We want you to communicate how you did it, not just that you did it. Think about how you might report your work to your supervisor, board, or any other person or entity that you answer to. Next issue we kind of see is reporting on work covered in previous updates. Your update should primarily cover the work covered in the last reporting period or the last 6 months. The exception is when you have quantitative milestones and outcomes. In those cases, we do want to hear how much progress you've made in that reporting period, but also where that puts you in meeting your overall goals. The other major exception would be your spending, which is reported as the amount spent since the project began. Otherwise, please try and stick to the work completed during the reporting period. Another issue we often see is overly technical updates. We see this particularly with research projects. You should try to write for an intelligent but non-expert audience. Avoid discipline-specific jargon. And you can use attachments to provide more technical information, such as journal articles, if you want to have that extra detail. The next common issue is a failure to report on expenses paid. If you're reporting work accomplished, we expect to see the dollars spent in the budget that corresponds to that work. Alternatively, if we see that you are reporting spending under a budget item, but don't see you describe the work conducted in your update, we will send your update back for revisions. Another common issue is no update or a lack of detail on dissemination efforts. Dissemination is a really important part of your work plan. Please report on those efforts. Tell us what events and when, how many social media posts and what was their general content. Include confirmation that you followed those acknowledgement requirements that Noah was just talking about, such as tagging us or that you've posted a sign with the ENRTF logo at a trailhead. These are all things we are looking for in the dissemination update. Now, here's one of the bigger issues we see: failure to report on challenges and issues. We understand few projects run to completion as originally planned. If you're running into problems that may impact your ability to achieve your milestones and outcomes, we need to know as soon as possible so we are ready to help with potential solutions consistent with your appropriation language. It's often only when we start asking questions because we notice information is missing from the status update that we find out there is a problem. Please be upfront with us. We're here to help. And the final common issue is your update is late or not submitted. There are potential consequences if you're out of compliance. As Noah mentioned, if you're a nonprofit, for-profit, or local government, i.e. a non-state entity, you won't get reimbursed for expenses until your update has been approved. For state agencies, public universities, and other state entities, that doesn't apply, but it may impact your ability for future funding. In extreme cases, your current funds could be frozen. So please contact your staff lead if you need more time, but do not blow off your reporting. It is a legal requirement. So before I move on to amendments, I do want to mention that you may need to provide additional reporting beyond your regular status updates. For example, if you request an amendment between regular reporting times, or if there's a milestone that you need to meet and requires LCCMR review, staff may ask you to submit an additional update between your regular reporting dates. Another example is when you get to the end of your project, you will need to submit a final status update as well as a final abstract. There are also additional reporting requirements related to land acquisitions and patents and intellectual property. For example, if you're acquiring land, you need to submit closing documents for LCCMR review at least 10 business days prior to closing. And there are ongoing reporting requirements even after your project ends. So make sure you review the materials available from our website and online system on these requirements. Now I'd like to move on to amendments. So amendments are the second major way we will be interacting with you over the course of your project. And essentially, it's when you need to amend your approved work plan. So anytime you need to make a change to your work plan, including the budget, because you would like to conduct work differently than originally planned, you need to submit an amendment request. Remember, your work plan is your agreement with the LCCMR on how you will use the funds appropriated to you. You cannot deviate from that agreement. However, you can request an amendment to the approved work plan. There are three basic types of amendments: changes in your reporting schedule, changes in the project manager, and changes to activities, the budget, parcel list, etc. All of these changes may be requested using the online system. So let's go into a little more detail about these types of amendments and where you can request those changes. The first type of amendment I mentioned was a change in your reporting schedule. Once again, most of you are on an April-October reporting schedule. However, if you would prefer to report on a different 6-month schedule, say February-August, you can request an amendment to change the schedule. You can request a change to your reporting schedule using a link found on the narrative page of your work plan under the timeline heading. When you click on that link, you enter the dates that you would like to report and submit it to us for review. It's that easy. The second type of amendment is to change who is serving as the project manager. All of you are currently project managers. However, during the course of the project, you may need to designate someone else as the project manager. For example, you may move into a new position with the organization and no longer oversee the project. You may accept another job and be leaving the organization, or you may be taking an extended leave of absence or sabbatical. These are all examples of when you may need to change the project manager. You or your organization must arrange to have someone else take your place if you are no longer going to be the project manager. This is extremely important to do for all the reasons Noah mentioned earlier when talking about the responsibilities of the project manager. The good news is it is easier for you to request a change before you leave the project. All you have to do is go to the project manager info page under Project Collaborator tab in your work plan and click on Do you need to change project managers? You can then enter the name and email of the proposed new project manager and provide us a simple explanation of why the change is needed. One quick note to remember, the proposed new project manager will need to be registered in the online system before you submit the change request. So now let's move on to the big one. That is requesting a change to activities, the budget and parcel list, etc. Essentially anything else in the work plan. Any deviation from your approved work plan, no matter how small, generally must be approved through an amendment to the work plan. For example, over the course of your project, you may find that you allocated too much money to one line item in your budget, but not enough in another. You may find that there is a new cost that you didn't foresee. You may find that your original plan on how you were going to do the project isn't going to work. If you're purchasing land, you may find that another high priority parcel, not originally on your parcel list, has become available and you would like to add it to the parcel list. These are all examples of deviations from the approved work plan that require an amendment to the work plan. You may request these types of changes by clicking on the blue Select Action button in your work plan and selecting Initiate Amendment Request. This will open most fields in your work plan for editing. At that point, you can navigate to the parts of the work plans you would like to change and rewrite them to reflect the proposed changes. Essentially, you're editing the work plan to reflect how you would like to read going forward. The work plan will remain editable until the amendment is approved or withdrawn. Once you have made those changes, you will go to the reporting page and click on the Amendments tab. There you will find a short explanation. There you will provide a short explanation and justification for why you would like the amendment. At that point, you can go to the Review Submit page and submit the amendment request for review. I'll also mention that on this page, you'll see there are instructions on how to submit an amendment. So if you forget everything I've just said, if you just go to that tab and look at the instructions there, it's all there. Please note as well that if you have a status update due, i.e. within 6 weeks of your reporting date, you will need to complete the status update and submit it with your amendment request. So what happens after you submit? After you submit, staff will review the amendment request, and there are 3 primary things that we are looking for. First, is the amendment consistent with your appropriation language and the intent of the project? Next, are any proposed new expenses eligible for funding? So basically, are any of the expenses you're proposing, are those all eligible expenses? And finally, are there any technical issues with the amendment? For example, is a new budget line item in the right place in the budget and sufficiently described? Have you provided sufficient explanation for the needing the amendment? Has the work plan been amended in all the applicable places to reflect the proposed changes? These are the kind of things that staff are looking for. If there are any issues with the amendment, staff may send it back for revisions. Similar to status updates, you will receive an email from the online system alerting you to the need for revisions, and you can look on the comments and revisions page of your work plan to see what revisions are needed. Once any needed revisions have been made, if the amendment is not significant, staff may approve the amendment. However, if the amendment is significant, it may require approval by the full commission. And if it requires a change to your appropriation language, it must be approved by the legislature as well. So here are a few important things to remember regarding amendment requests. First, request amendments before project changes are implemented. This is for your protection. There are prohibited expenses that the ENRTF cannot pay for, and it is impossible to have an amendment request denied. We wouldn't want you to incur costs and then find out that you will not be able to use trust fund dollars to pay for them. Second, amendments are not active until approved, so don't change your actions until approval is complete. Once again, we don't want you to incur expenses that you can't use trust fund dollars for. Third, changes must be consistent with your appropriation language. Your appropriation language reflects what you propose to do and why you were awarded funding. The LCCMR has no authority to allow you to deviate from that language. If you want to need to make a change that is inconsistent with your appropriation language, please talk to staff, because that will actually require a change in law from the legislature. And finally, significant edits, either in scope or quantity, may result in delayed response from LCCMR staff and possible elevation to the full commission for approval, which is to say, don't wait until the last minute to submit an amendment request. It may take time before it can be approved. So before I hand this back to Noah, I want to say one quick word about extensions. All of your work plans include a project end date, when you must complete all work on the project and no further costs may be incurred. You can find that project end date on the narrative page of your work plan. Now that your work plan has been approved, extensions of that project end date are rare. Most extension requests must be approved by the commission itself and be approved by the legislature by passing a bill with the change. If you think you may need an extension, please talk to your LCCMR staff lead as early as possible. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Noah to wrap this up.
All right, thank you, Mike. I'm sure all of you will remember all of that come your first update being due. We do not expect you to remember all of that, which is why I'm going to talk a little bit about, just to summarize, where to find all this information that we just threw at you. And the two likely places to find that are our website, and I'll actually pull up our website in a second here once I'm done and show you exactly where to find that, and our online system, which you saw some screenshots of, but again, I'll pull that up and walk through where to find some of those most commonly used tools on that, and some tips and tricks for making that easy to use. And if you still can't find what you need between those two places, you can always reach out to your staff lead. We do encourage you to try to figure this out yourself, find an answer to a question, and if you feel good about the information that you found and you feel like you can proceed, please do so, and then reach out to LCCMR staff if you still feel like your question is unanswered or unresolved. A couple quick tips and tricks before I pull up the online portal, our online system. Each page on the online system provides relevant instructions and guidance for each for the subject of that tab. And the help bubbles are there to help. We have a lot, we have a lot of project managers who don't realize those help bubbles are there and don't realize they actually contain pretty useful information. Please save your work before navigating to a new page. When in doubt, click save, just in case, never hurts. And it's also good to only have one tab or window open at a time. Again, this isn't like a Google Doc where you can edit it in real time. And this is especially the case, again, if you're delegating access. So I will stop my screen share for a second here and pull up a live version of our website. And as I'm doing so, if folks do have questions, we've received some, and we received some as well prior to this presentation, but please drop them in the chat and we'll be able to address them once I'm done here. Okay, hopefully you all are seeing the LCCMR webpage. This is our homepage. And the spot you can go to find most information is right here, the project manager info portion of our website. It includes table of contents, includes quick links to all of the relevant spots here. We have acknowledgement requirements, which include where you can find our logos and where you can find a DNR sign to purchase, which we strongly we actually require you to do so if you have a trail or some sort of capital project. And much of the information around updates and amendments is here as well. And requirements for capital projects, land acquisition and restoration, how to report on those. This information is all in one place and is a good kind of one-stop shop if you aren't quite sure what you're looking for, or you are and don't know where to find it. The other place that you'll probably spend a lot of time is our LCCMR proposal and grant management system. We call it the online system. And I have actually pulled up a version of it here where I can walk you through a little bit of the places to find commonly used tools. This is the introduction or the landing page. You'll notice that this blue select action button follows you on every page you go to, and that will include some very simple and easy or commonly used tools. This is where you can go to delegate access. This is where you can go to and can go to initiate amendment request in particular. So I won't stop at every one of these tabs, but the second tab, the project collaborator tab, is where you can change your project manager, of course. So that's something that people commonly use. And again, these little help bubbles pull up, well, that's a pretty straightforward one, but I'll find another one here. So in each tab, again, at the top, there will be instructions of what is required on that tab. So for the budget section, for example, under personnel, it gives detailed instructions on what is required for personnel line items, professional and technical contracts as well. And same as you go through the attachments page, it should be very straightforward on where to add things. I'd like to find a good help bubble to use here. Let's see, where's a good help bubble? Okay. Oh, no, that's not the one. Where was I? Oh yeah, here we go. So this is an example of one you can pull up. You shouldn't have to edit this tab, but it will provide you with more detail on what that is. And again, under the reporting tab here, here's your status updates and here are your amendments. And again, if you won't be able to submit until you provide spending status updates, but you'll be able to jump to it on this tab. So that's kind of the most commonly used tools in the online system. And I will now stop sharing and we'll get to some questions. So I think I'll start with the first question that we received prior to submitted ahead of time. And this is from somebody who wanted to know, how will we know to check the online system for revisions or when things are approved or not? When does it send automated messages? I'm actually going to ask my colleague, Michael Varian, who can also introduce himself at the same time, to answer that question for us.
Hello, everyone. For those of you that I haven't met or worked with here, my name is Michael Varian. I'm Senior Project Analyst with LCCMR, and very thankful that you are all here today. Interest in learning more about the updates and reporting side of active projects. So in regards to how will you know to check the online system for revisions or when things are approved or not, the system does send out automatic emails, and you have already received some of those throughout the process, but that will continue through the life of the project. When you are getting close to an update due, the system, about 45 days before that due date, will switch over to status of update due. And that is really the system notifying you that that's coming up, but also that and you'll see that on your dashboard when you're in the system, the project status will change to update due. And that is the system switching over so that that update is now has the fields that are editable, so that you can begin working on it, drafting it, so that it's ready for that actual due date. The system will send out reminder emails a week ahead of time that it's due, the day that it's due, and then roughly every week or so after or past that due date, it'll send a reminder auto email, and those are just automatically generated. But watch your emails for those. So that's how you'll know if something is due, or if revisions are requested, or past due. And I think that gets at that.
Hey, and Michael, we had a question in the chat just really quick. Could you say again how often updates are due?
Oh, so updates are due on an annual or semi-annual basis. For the most part, the default is semi-annual, so roughly every 6 months. And that reporting schedule is found on the narrative page. Towards the bottom, there's a timeline section that has those dates, and I believe the 2023 projects are on an April, October timeline, unless you have otherwise requested a different reporting schedule.
All right. Thank you, Michael. There's one more question in the chat, and I will actually share my screen again to show somebody wanted to know where again we can find our staff lead. So I will share my screen and pull that up. All right, hopefully folks can see our staff lead, see my screen again. So this is the online system again. You go to tab 9, or sorry, excuse me, tab 10, doing great at counting. And under comments and revisions, there will be a staff lead for this work plan. This one says it's just a administrative account we use, so it's not actually a staff member we have, but it's under tab 10, comments and revision, and it'll be staff lead for this work plan. And that's where you'll find that. All right, I'll stop sharing my screen.
No, I also have a question. If
Sure.
So I had a question, and it's actually a good question I think everybody should probably hear the answer to, which was, do I need to submit an amendment request if there is a change within personnel? So I mentioned that you need an amendment to change line items if you need to allocate more or less funds per line item. Personnel is the one section of the budget where you do have more flexibility. So as long as you're not adding a new position or changing the total amount you need for personnel, you can actually shift how much you're spending you originally allocated per line item for personnel without requesting an amendment. So basically, we only need an amendment if you need more money overall for personnel, or if you need to change the actual position and create a new position or delete a position within personnel section. Otherwise, you do have flexibility to move the money around a little bit if you need more or less for a particular position than you originally thought.
Great. We have another question in the chat asking who leads the DNR training for LCCMR project managers. And I believe that's Catherine Sherman-Hone, but Michael or Mike, if you know, I think it's her team at least. I'm not sure if she's the one putting it on exactly.
Sorry, Noah, could you repeat that one?
Sure. Who leads the DNR training for LCCMR project managers? And I know it's Catherine Sherman-Hone's team.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. This is Michael Varian again. I am not sure who is leading that, but I suspect that it's Catherine and her team will be putting that on here, and you should receive some notification from your from the DNR grants unit at some point here about that upcoming training.
And another question in the chat here about when that training will be. It'll be sometime in October, so about another month and a half. Okay, we have another question about what is allowed in terms of moving funds between budget lines during a project, so after it's been submitted. Mike, would you want to talk about that?
Sure. What was the question again, Noah?
Sure. It was about what is allowed in terms of moving funds between budget lines during an active project.
Once again, any movement of funds is going to require an amendment be submitted to us, regardless of the amount. In terms of what's allowed and what's not, once again, we sort of just looking for the reason behind it. So why you need less money in one line item and why you need more in another line item, and just making sure that it's consistent with your overall appropriation and intent of the project. But those are the basic things we're looking for when you're trying to move money from one line item to another. I know, Michael, do you want to add anything to that, or?
And I was thinking of how that maybe applies back to like activities or milestones. It's kind of a similar situation. If there are changes there that need to be made, because we know that plans don't always play out as planned, and so that would be another situation where you would submit an amendment to make changes to said milestone or activity. Again, those would have to be in line with the work plan and the appropriation language, but similar reasoning for that budget, those budget amendments.
Great, Michael, I'm going to ask you to answer this question as well. Where would we see a pending, the status of a pending request for a project manager change in the online system, and if anything is needed for processing the request?
So when you are back in that online system on the I think it's page 2 or 2 that has the project manager info, your name and whatnot, there's a hyperlink underneath that to submit that request. At the active project stage, that'll actually get kind of recorded as an amendment request or change. And so if you go to the reporting tab under the sub page for amendments, there'll be a new line entry on that amendments table for that request, and that's where you'll see it in your active project in the work plan. And then once that is approved, you will get an automated email about the approval, and the new project manager will get that as well. So
great, thank you. Let's see here. Gotta make sure all my questions in a row. What if I discover, somebody asked, what if I discover a mistake after an update has been approved? Mike, would you want to take that one?
Sure. So if there's a mistake after an update is approved, I'm assuming what you're talking about is there was something incorrect in the update that needs to be corrected. You can always contact your staff lead to let them know, and we can actually send it back to you for revisions at that point. So even after something's been approved, it can be sent back for revisions. Is that correct, Michael?
yeah, so that certainly would be one option. So depending if it's a minor technical correction, we might do that, or we might just have you just do an amendment and just make that correction depending on what the error is. So if it's something that's you discover an error in, say, the amount spent or in the work plan itself, maybe it was an amendment that was approved and you need to make a correction there, or if it's in the actual update itself. So there's a couple ways that we might do that. Either way, just get a hold of us, let us know, and we'll figure out the best course of action for making that correction.
Okay. And Michael, while I have you here, I'm wondering if you could also just clarify how the online system saves progress as folks go.
So the online system is supposed to be saving as you go. The frequency at which it's saving, right? I don't know if it's every couple of seconds, every time you hit a character, but it should be auto saving your progress as you go through. Each page does have a save and proceed or a save button on it, so it doesn't hurt to use those. But the system should be auto saving as you are entering stuff along the way. But again, it doesn't hurt to hit those save buttons or just give the system a few moments to actually record those entries and make the save.
Great. We have a question about whether changing a vendor or contractor that you give the example of used for lab analyses of water samples require an amendment. In what situations does changing vendors or contracts require updates or amendments? And Mike, would you want to take that?
I can take first shot at it. Yes, that would require an amendment. One of the things we like to see is actually have the actual contractor and vendor be correct in the work plan. So if you have to change that contract, even if they're providing exactly the same service, we would want an amendment to have the proper name contractor within the work plan. I'll just mention this. One of the things we sometimes see have happen in a work plan is sometimes you don't know who you're going to contract with. So when the work plan's approved, it actually says TBD. And it's fairly common for us, once you do actually enter into a contract, to ask you then to submit an amendment just to change the TBD to an actual entity who you've contracted with. So sort of a similar situation. But yes, if you do have a change like that, we would like to see an amendment. Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
So the other part that I was thinking of, and maybe in the scenario, it's something where you had previously thought that you were going with a certain entity for a contract or a vendor, and things have since changed, right? So that we want to get that updated, corrected. If it is something where you maybe have started with a vendor and have a contract in place, they've done a body of work. Again, we would also, and for some reason you need to switch. We would want to see an amendment for the new contract with the new vendor, and then and leave that old vendor still in there for the body of work that they did that cost. And so, yes, if there's a new vendor, a new contract, that's either hasn't been identified in the budget on an existing line item, or if we were adding a new one, both we would want to see an amendment request.
Great. So we have a question. Thank you, Michael. We have a question about whether there is any maternal leave or specific extensions accepted when the project manager is also the main responsible researcher to develop the work. And since the timelines are based in law, that's part of the process. The process for granting some sort of extension is the same regardless of the reason. And so there's that's something we can definitely work with. It would be a good idea in this case to contact your LCCMR staff lead as soon as possible to discuss options. And that's something, again, like we can more than likely work with and work through. It's just knowing that well in advance will definitely make things go as smoothly as possible. But that's something we have dealt with before, and we can certainly work with.
Yeah, I'll just take an opportunity to mention one thing, Noah, related to that. There are multiple dates you'll see in your work plan. So I mentioned the project end date, which is when you have to complete all your work. You'll also see there's an appropriation end date, and that's when that's the hard deadline where the money's no longer available for your project. Usually the project end date and the appropriation end date are the same, but there are situations where sometimes your project end date might be earlier than your appropriation end date. Those are the situations where we might have a little more flexibility to approve an extension, at least to the appropriation end date. It's when you want to do an extension beyond that appropriation end date that things become problematic, because that does require the legislature to make that change. And one of the things that's hard about it is that we often won't know whether that change has been approved until a month before your project was supposed to end, which means you're going to be in limbo for a long time and you're not going to have any guarantees. So I just wanted to mention, sort of as an addendum to that, about extensions.
Thank you, Mike. That's helpful. We are at time. We have one more question that I'd like to get to, and then we'll let you go. So, and this is a good one, so I want to make sure we get to it. So the question is, how does LCCMR define project? In our work plan, we identify many distinct and separate projects, all within the same grant. In your definition, would these be considered separate projects, or would they all be in one project because they fit within the same grant? Is this the same way that the Department of Labor defines a project for purposes of contracting and prevailing wage law? So generally speaking, we are looking at the appropriation as the project, and this may not be the same as the Department of Labor. This won't be a totally satisfying answer, but this is an issue we are aware of and are monitoring it along with the DNR. So we will certainly, this is something we're looking to address and clarify, and we will hopefully have an answer soon. Okay, we are a little bit over time, and I know people have busy schedules, so I want to let you all go, but I want to say thank you very much for all the work you do to make Minnesota's environment and natural resources as special as it is, and we look forward to working with you over the next years. And please, again, reach out if you have questions, and we'll look forward to working with you. Take care and have a great day.